That's correct.
Right.
Yes.
So, which is why we didn't recognize it for being in the council chambers. Are there any questions, discussions about it? David, and if you'll turn on the green light.
Yeah, I have one question, just curiosity. Have they lined up all of those paintings and are they all coming? That's impressive.
I mean, it is my assumption that based on that those are the ones that are coming, and they're coming from very august institutions.
Yeah.
I was hoping that Angela would be here. I have dealt with that particular curator before at the Florence Museum of Art, just on some other reasons. And, you know, we at the college have lent materials to museums, and they generally do send that type of paperwork with it, basically saying that they are, you know, they meet temperature and humidity specifications, the travel is a certain way, and that kind of thing. It is my understanding that these have already been accepted.
Yeah, because I was gonna say, if it's aspirational, that's one thing, but if they were already agreed to, then I would say we have no, why would we have, if Boston had a problem, I don't think we would. I mean, they didn't have a problem.
So any other discussions or questions, Dale?
Mr. Chairman, what are we being asked to do here?
I think the city just, you know, the city wants us to say yay or nay on the possibility of lending the Francis Marion portrait, which is in the old Exchange building, to the Florence Art Museum for this particular exhibit. I do believe it's similar to things that we've done before. City Council will take our recommendation into consideration. I don't think the buck stops here.
Okay, well, I was impressed by the package that the institution had to complete to essentially ask for the loan and justify their terms of receipt and care. I had never seen an application of that type, but it's exhausting. And I don't want to ever have to fill one of those out. That's incredible. And that format it looks like an association type that other institutions can use to make sure they cover all their bases. Is that right?
Right. So museums, you know, are that, you know, they're to be accredited. So, you know, museums like the Gibbs and the Florence Art Museum, you know, have a standard level of accreditation like schools do. They have to have maintain a certain, you know, type of temperature and relative humidity, et cetera, in their vaults, and there are standards about how to move art. And I'm assuming that all of those attachments, you know, are showing that they're following pretty much typical protocol and standard operating procedures. You know, because we are unsure, I do think, you know, that if someone did want to make a motion, the motion could be made that we approve of this if indeed all of those other pieces of artwork have been accepted, you know, and those other institutions are sending it as well. Again, not trying, but you know, that might be a way that we could be sure that, you know, because again, it was somewhat unclear, but it was my understanding that those pieces of art had already been accepted.
We could say either if or when. Because
Right.
there may be some applications still out,
Right.
just
I mean,
like ours is.
it does seem, I mean, I do think they were saying, you know, February 14th actually seems, to be frank, that's actually a fairly quick turnaround to get a piece of art, even though within the state of South Carolina, from one institution to another through a certified art mover, oftentimes, you know, an item actually it gets into the museum, then it is actually observed, and they do a conservation report on it when it is received, so that, you know, so when it goes back, they know that it's in the exact same condition. And I'm assuming that they can do this with the turnaround. It was submitted just December 2nd. So it looks like they're comfortable with dealing, although it does say 2021, and I'm assuming that. So I don't know if this has been sitting in the city for a year. I just don't know.
Well, the document that's dated 2021 is a proposal. And do we know who Andrew Stout is? I'm sorry if I don't, but he's the one who was the recipient of the proposal.
Right, and I'm not sure if he's a City of Charleston employee or I'm not sure. I know some of the names at the old exchange, but that's not one that I'm familiar with.
Well, it may have been prepared, the proposal may have been prepared for one of the other institutions where Andrew Stout is, and that's not so important to us. And that date is, we can overlook that, but within the document itself, there is a set of dates. The dates when the exhibit would occur, and they're not 2023, they're 2022. And I didn't print that page.
Nor did I.
I know. Well, I think we can raise it. Right. The proposals does, but there's a.
Hello, welcome.
But anyway, internally, there's a set of dates that are 2022. I don't know if that needs to be corrected. It shouldn't stop us from our vote.
You know, it is my understanding when it was emailed to us that although there is, you know, as many of y'all on this commission know, this was arts and history. It has been split. You know, the arts has been split off. I thought that this was more appropriate to go to the arts, but I was told that the mayor, et cetera, wanted to see if the historical commission would approve of it as well too. I do not know if it's going to arts as well, to be frank. I just do not know. I said, I do know that just looking at it, it does seem that they're following all the standard protocols.
Well, our realm would be if there's any text or interpretation to go along with it that we may be asked to edit or approve.
And again,
I don't see that in here.
Right. And yeah. Yes, I'm assuming, and I just don't know if the text that's, you know, that's attached to these images would be similar to the ones, you know, that they are to just artist and size and medium. But again, I think since I think we will be guiding city council and not making the decision ourselves, I think we can make any kind of motion with any kind of caveats that we want. So I'm encouraging people to do that. And turn on your microphone, please, Robert.
This is the Florence Art Museum.
Yes.
I mean, you know its reputation.
Yes, it is. And it is an accredited art museum, the way, you know, the way the Gibbs is.
So, I mean, why would we object to it?
Right. I think we're just being overly cautious because maybe we have incomplete information. You know, not exactly sure when the dates are. But again, I think the city council just wanted us to advise them on this with our opinion.
I move that we recommend.
Okay, any discussion? Call for the vote. Everyone in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? I think it's unanimous. Okay, so the order of business that we have here today is this marker from the State Archives for the Charleston riot of 1919. And as we've done it before, if we want to take it side by side, if people have significant or have any kind of issues, questions, comments, let's open the floor for discussion. David.
I've got a couple of comments. One has to do with the title. It seems to me that the 1919 race riot would be more appropriate because by leading it as Charleston riot, it implies that this was a riot started by people in Charleston. Technically, that's correct because the sailors happened to be here in Charleston, but the sailors weren't Charlestonians. And if the document that was included with the proposal, which I understand is a really interesting document.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, he specifically on 2 occasions makes, and as I understand it, this was not for public consumption until it was printed. So this is his private journals, makes a strong point on 2 occasions that the local white Charlestonians did not do this. This was, I don't want to say they were all Yankees, but they were they were, no, they were from off. Exactly. So consequently, it seems to me, and that goes into a couple of other comments I'll have later on, that maybe it ought to not be named the Charleston riot of 1919, but maybe 1919 race riot. Implicitly, by the fact it's going to be erected in Charleston, it has something to do with Charleston. That's just that's one comment. The other relates to that. In the, I don't know, whatever, line 12, where it refers to Black residents and white sailors. But it also, on the next page, also refers to white sailors. I again, and maybe I'm just being a little picky about it, but I think it ought to be United States, U.S. Navy sailors on leave. You don't need to emphasize their color twice. To me, I mean, there are other sailors and, you know, U.S. Navy sailors, and I think it ought to be specific as to who the people were who were doing this.
Do you think you could get beyond that again, just because of space on line 13 of putting US in front of Naval Training Center?
Well,
It looks like there would be space to keep that.
I think if you took out white and put in U.S. Navy, if you notice line 16 still has spaces to go, that would fit.
So you're suggesting taking out the word, so you're saying Black residents and sailors?
And U.S. It doesn't have to be United States. It could be and U.S. Navy sailors.
I mean, I see your point, but I'm going to be devil's advocate. But then since we're specifically saying that they are Black residents, I think we've always tried to write these plaques assuming, and I think in Angela's words, that the people reading them know absolutely nothing about US history and we have to do it for them. Could people have assumed that the Navy was integrated at that time? You know, if you say US
Well,
Navy.
you're getting in the next on the overlay, you're getting for several hours, hundreds of white sailors. So you're going to get the point across of the color difference, but without the emphasis on who these people were. That's what I'm getting at.
All right. And again, I'll just do for argument's sake, just because you read one side doesn't mean you read the other, you know, and again, I think we always have
we
to.
all do what you know what's on the other side, at least implicit.
Yeah, but again,
This is explicit.
right, but you can't be sure that someone reading one side is going to read the other side. That's just my thought, but I'll throw it open to other people for, I mean, I think the point of 1919 race riot, you know, it puts it in context because it was a United States issue. It was not just a Charleston issue. And you're right, the fact that it's sitting there in Charleston would assume that it is a Charleston event.
Yeah. And it's particularly when, now, I'm assuming, because I do have a question about this because of the disparity with regard to injuries and all, which I will wait until we get to the second one. But I'm assuming that does anybody, I wish Nick were here because Nick wrote a really good article about this on his time machine. The problem is his article was in 1919. This wasn't published until 2021. And so I don't know whether that would have changed some of the stuff that was in Nick's podcast or not.
Right.
But I mean, he's very explicit. I mean, he even tells exactly how the thing started.
Right. I mean, he, Dr. McFall was in, as far as I dealt with his niece, Lanice, who got this published. He did obviously write it after the fact, whether he made it on, whether he kept a diary at the time, we don't know. I think this was composed probably in the 40s sometimes. His memory seems to be amazing. You know, I will say that, you know, I have read the book called Red Summer that came out about 5 or 6 years ago about the national things. And, you know, and I did question Edwin Breeden about this at the state archives. You know, did he want, and again, sorry, it's the second time, did he want to put in how many, because there is information about how many white people were injured, et cetera, et cetera. And anyway, so, you know, I did, again, devil's advocate, tried to talk to him about that. But
I was going to get it out.
Okay. But staying, so is there so anything else to say about this first side, David?
No.
Robert?
First of all, I I think this is pretty much fine. I agree with David about it. I hate to call it a Charleston riot, particularly since it was started by people who really weren't from Charleston. But on the other hand, Nick really wrote a very long, very comprehensive article, which is online. So I guess what I was hoping is Nick was going to be here, because if he puts his stamp of approval on it, then it's fine with me. So I guess, has he opined about this?
I've actually, I saw him on the street a few days ago, but we have not talked about this.
I guess my question, I think it's generally accurate. The problem is these things, you only have this tiny little number of words. So you can't really, here's Nick's article, which is 15 pages or whatever. But I would really like for Nick to tell us whether he disagrees with it. So I'm not making a motion. I'm just saying that's my only concern about it. Thanks.
Carl? See,
Peg,
this is really piddly, but you've got black capped and you have white in lowercase. And I've seen it with white being capitalized now. And for consistency's sake, wouldn't you like to have black and white capitalized? I don't really care. I'm just talking about consistency.
again, I noticed that, and I asked Edwin Breeden, because it is the state archives, as we all know, that, that submits this. He said that some of the standards that they cleaved, I told him newspapers seem to capitalize both black and white. And he did say, again, it's completely our province to do this. I'm just saying that I did ask him that question. And he said at a style sheet that they cleave to, they have not capitalized white. If he did, I'm sorry, it was so long ago that, yeah. Dale.
Well, in this case, they're both used as adjectives, black residents, white sailors. So what grammatical or English speaking reason is there to capitalize one and not the other? Or is there some other reason, which I take it must be in the minds of the archives folks? And then the point was made about, well, at that time, probably, I'm not sure, but probably all sailors were white. And it begs the point, why use the word? But at the same time, if you believe that people are reading to learn and they don't know these things, what can we use something other than white that gives the point of segregation or segregated, racially segregated? That's longer and maybe cumbersome, but at the same time, it does away with this problem of black and white being adjectives, not nouns.
I think we've got the ability to say capitalize white, we can certainly recommend that. Right. So again, we can do that. And again, I do always cleave back to the point that we cannot assume that people are as familiar with history as we are. And if you're calling it a race riot, it's a race riot between black and white people. That's my personal, thoughts. If I'm just curious as to what's the issue of, basically saying, yep, they were white sailors and yep, they were black residents. That's just, I can see parity with alphabetization or something like that. Capitalization. Oh, sorry.
It could have been any concept. And I think it's important, particularly since there was a differentiation in Dr. McFall's about who really caused it and who really participated and who didn't, is to make sure that that aspect of the language is emphasized. That's all.
Right.
And I know you don't want me to say it's on the next page, so to speak, but it is on the next page, and I don't have a problem with it there.
Peg.
It does say they're from the Naval Training Center.
It does.
So one would assume that they were US naval sailors.
And at least put in US.
And again, I think you could put US in front of Naval Training Center. They were white sailors on leave from the US Naval Training Center. Oh, thanks for that. And I would probably leave the periods out to see if we can, I don't.
I mean, I actually did that first and then I said, well, you know.
Oh, I guess they've got periods up above, Philip.
See, I actually had it going there originally.
Very impressed.
Yeah, we actually asked for it and thank you for delivering it. Here I am looking at hard copy, not realizing it's up there.
I'll go along with that. Because I'm such a nice cooperative.
What about the title?
And did we want to train the title to 1919 Race Riot
Yeah, I think so.
or Race Riot of 19, Race Riot of 1919?
Either one.
So that's. Yep, and that might actually give them another line that may not throw the 16. So it is. So I can read it out loud, Philip, but if you can actually just cursor it up so everybody can see it and to see if people are happy with the text on side one.
No, take it out. That's what I said. I wanted, it wasn't a bunch of Charleston people.
I could read the whole thing out if you'd like.
Yeah. Right. Or, I mean, I will say that I did a little bit of reading beforehand. And again, one source that I read said that, that there were X number of sailors and one Charlestonian. They did, no, they did say that on the street involved in one of the
I know he was one of
fracases.
the ones that was arrested.
Uh-huh.
That's what it is. There was like one and every 2 other thousand were all.
Right. So I do
You
think
know what
that,
his explanation was? And when he went to the court, he said that he felt it was, that all these were US sailors. So he felt it was his patriotic duty to try to help them. That's what he said. It goes back to being in the Navy. If they had been Greek sailors, he wouldn't have probably have participated.
so are people clear about how it's been amended? We can look at it there. I can read it out loud. But so what we're saying is that it would be the race riot of 1919. And have we decided, do we want black and white
What?
capitalized?
Lowercase.
Or both of them lowercase?
No, it has to be upper. Listen, I went through this with the revision of the short history of Charleston. USC Press has got capital B for black, capital W for white. Yeah.
I just went through a book process the same way. Both were capitalized for parity
That's
as
what-
adjectives
that's what
and
people do.
nouns.
Yeah. I mean, we're living in the times we're living in, so. Yeah.
Were, as opposed to.
You know, but we are trapped between the truth and grammar, and I think we're doing a good job with,
His or her book is no, it's their book.
Well, I think the modern usage is capital B, capital W.
No, I agree. That's what I said. I have no problem. I'm just saying.
So those are the changes. So so race riot of 1919, white capitalized and putting in US in front of Naval Training Center. I think those are the emendations that we're suggesting for side one. If that is the case, can we have a motion that we amend it that way?
I'm so moved that those 3 amendment modifications be adopted for side 1.
Okay, any seconds?
Second.
Discussion? Call the question. Everyone in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? I think we got it. Side 2, and so then again, it's going to be, I'm assuming 19 race riot of 1919 as the title of side 2 as well, to be unified with that. And I'm assuming it's going to be sponsored by St. Stephen's Church 2023 instead of 2022, but I will leave that up to the archives in the small
Mr. Chairman,
print. Yes.
this is for my personal information. Who coined the phrase red storm?
Pardon?
Who coined the phrase Red Summer?
So Red Summer was actually coined back at the time by James Weldon Johnson of the NAACP. Red, I think, so in the books, there are books published always calling it the Red Summer, and I think that's why it's in quotation marks. Red being the fact of the violence, and red also being, this is really getting into the weeds, the idea that Bolsheviks, because, the Russian Revolution had just had it, and Bolsheviks might be infiltrating African Americans and making them un-American, but it was called Red Summer at the time, and many scholars, there are books actually called Red Summer.
Scare was also applied because there were many more, there were a number of race-related riots, but there were a number of more, in some ways, more deadly they were union-oriented, because exactly what you said, it was Bolshevik influences, perceived Bolshevik influences.
If you get, there was labor unrest, a lot of the white veterans had come back to town, the black veterans had come back to town. There was a lot of tension, between, that kind of thing. But that is something that, again, and I think that's why they put it in quotation marks, because that's what it's been called since about that time period.
If I could just make a comment, and I'm a little late coming here to this meeting, but enjoy the discussion we've had already in the terms red and black and white and naval officers. We have to be mindful. My very simple question about Red Summer, because red also meant, if I remember, Indians. Race riots did not always contain blacks against whites. It was other ethnic groups from time to time in our American history. So we've got a limited space for these markers, and the more concise that we can possibly be, the more educated I think the reader is going to be with these things. We're being very clear and specific and precise, which I think is critical. And I think that was sort of the discussion we had around this table a few seconds ago. And I think that's just something we need to be mindful of from time to time, is that we got this much space to put a bunch of information on. And that has always struck me, that quotation of Red Summer, is what does that really mean? And I just didn't know. And frankly, I didn't know. So I think that the additions we made on here really are very helpful. And that's just something that I'm still kind of new to this commission, but I think it's still kind of helpful for us to remember what these things are up there for, and they're quote unquote permanent, whatever permanent means nowadays.
It would be more accurate to do that.
Dale.
I've learned more today about the Red Summer than I have ever known. So if the Red Summer was very robust and involved a lot of problems in a lot of places beyond race riots, then that's an if. Is it proper to say that the Red Summer was a wave of racists, or included or involved a wave of racist attacks? Or was it simply a wave of racist attacks? When you bring in international politics, it's beyond that.
Right. I mean, people are, my reading of it, again, no expert, but I read the book some years ago when it came out. There were a series of attacks. Chicago was certainly the worst, but they were attacking people, burning businesses, like they were doing in Charleston. They didn't burn them, but broke up businesses. They were not. Historians have gone on the record of basically saying that's why they thought they were caused. It's because of labor unrest, because of returning veterans at the time. People were not screaming, as far as I know, people were not screaming Bolshevik at each other, when they were attacking them. It wasn't a political agenda. Apparently, historians have come and said that this is why they did it. So you're on your smartphone. Yeah.
The authority is Wikipedia. Red Summer was a period in mid-1919 during which white supremacist terrorism and racial riots occurred in more than 3 dozen cities. That's the common meaning of it. That's the common.
Right.
That's the common meaning.
Right.
And if you could use your microphone there.
I said historically, there has been a distinction between the red summer, which really only referred to the race riots, and the red scare, which referred to much more unionization activities, strikes, Bolshevik
That's-
infiltration and stuff. So
Again,
there
it's
is a
consistent
distinction.
with Wikipedia, so. First Red Scare.
I don't need Wikipedia. I read all that.
I'm just
stuff.
saying, when it's in Wikipedia or on Google, it's a common meaning.
I remember John Martin Blum talking about.
I'm not saying it's
the Red
necessarily
Scare.
correct.
He was the best of you.
I would also see what, I was try to look up the book on the Red Scare, but I wonder what sources they give, Robert, on that.
Yeah.
If they give that book called Red Scare, which was.
Well, the National World War I Museum called it an outbreak of racial violence known as Red Summer. Occurred in
Red Summer,
1990.
that's
I mean, it just
what
seems
I
like
meant.
all of the sources say the same thing.
So, okay, but back to this side, we say that we're going to change the title. Are there any other issues with the words? And if we could go by line.
White, line 2.
So white should be capitalized if it was on the other side. Good catch.
I do have a question. When you say it said others, and this goes back to the point I was making earlier, or that I should say Dr. McFall was making. Who are the others? I mean, again, is that going to be, we know there was one Charlestonian, but is that going to be perceived as what? You're talking about people aren't going to know anything. What are they going to say when they say others? They're going to think, oh, and a bunch of people from Charleston joined in, and there's no evidence of that. As far as I could tell, I read Nick's, I read Damon Forson that's got one about it. I read about 6 or 8 things, and I read this very carefully. And no one says anything in that regard that any appreciable number of local people had anything to do with it. So, I mean,
I take your point, but I also say too, but I think you're saying that it wasn't limited totally to white sailors.
that's what that says. And I'm saying, if
You said there weren't an appreciable number of people.
I assume not. I mean, like I said, I can't find it.
Well, Nick says somewhere, Charleston Navy imposed hundreds of sailors, some soldiers, and later civilians.
And that was done at the
Most of
time.
them spectators swell the proportion of the mob to the size of beyond control. So, I mean, I think the problem is it's frustrating that this was a riot caused by the U.S. Navy personnel. However, some small number of Charleston civilians
Well, they may have.
appear to have been involved in it. So, I mean, I don't know how you gonna put that on the plaque.
The one possible way you can do it, if you could, if it would accommodate line 3, you could possibly add the word some. For several hours, hundreds of white sailors and others moved along King Street, and some beat, stabbed. That's saying that not every person in the mob beat. And that way we could
Probably
say
not
that.
as good as you could do, because otherwise you just.
Yeah.
I do have another question. I read in a couple of places where they said there were a couple of thousand sailors, and this says hundreds.
I mean, I always thought it was hundreds, and I
He
think
said
that,
hundreds,
Right.
but I mean, there was some that said, in fact, in this article, that's why I was wondering, is this generally considered a fairly, reliable source? He talks about that there were ships in the harbor, and that the officers on the ships allowed the sailors from the ships to come ashore once they felt, heard about what was going on. And that's why he says there were actually thousands, not hundreds.
well,
you think-
fortunately,
You think Nick is correct in that regard?
I mean,
the newspaper says hundreds.
yeah,
Okay.
the problem I'm having is we have a resident expert who who is a very well respected historian. who
Well,
wrote
if
it.
Nick said hundreds, I can live with hundreds of these.
I mean, my feeling is we ought to approve it the way we want to approve it and then ask Nick. If he objects, and we take it up at the next meeting. I mean, it just seemed like if we got the guy who wrote the article.
I don't like
I
that
mean-
idea. That's a can. Let him talk let him talk to Harlan or you for that matter.
Yeah.
But I don't want, once we've done this before and we've
Well, that's true.
undone
Right.
stuff.
But I do think possibly, and again, I understand the larger issue, but again, just trying to squeeze it back down to this thing. If with the inclusion of some,
Yeah, that's fine.
That'd be good.
I mean, that would basically say that not everyone in the crowd beat, stabbed,
It also implies that was a very small number.
councilman.
If you went to line 3 and after King Street, period, took out the word and
And then you wouldn't have to throw.
then
the
you
line.
said some rioters beat,
Or you could just say some beats, yes.
some rioters.
I'm not sure we could,
Or to say some,
right. So for several hours, hundreds of white sailors and others moved along King Street, period. That's great. Some beat, stabbed, and shot African Americans.
That undoes exactly what you suggested. Because it's the some others. That's saying some beat, stabbed, and shot.
Right, we're saying that, but not everyone that moved along King Street beat, shoved, and
I think your original suggestion. And some beats that it's better. My feeling.
yeah, if it won't throw the line.
So what you said, let's see, what read.
No, I don't know. It would be
It's
and some.
Do you highlight the changes you've made, or in the underline, strikeout, or shading?
Do it in yellow or.
Shading is more obvious.
I can have that done, yeah. Was there anything else for this side that we did?
I mean, if we thought that some would throw it too far, I wonder if you could,
Look on down in the,
He took it away from Frank. It used to be white sailors and some others moved along King Street, so he moved.
go down to the line 19 and some who took up.
Well, that's the black.
Well, then why don't you,
Well, some refers to sailing.
and that,
well, the line 19,
and that some is referring to the African Americans who defended themselves.
Right.
well, then why don't you say who, excuse me, why don't you say, pardon me, including, oh, never mind.
You could say those, but again, I mean, I'm not sure if some is one.
Let's do one at a time.
Yeah,
This
let's,
is getting crazy.
so my thought would be is if 13, if line 3 is thrown too far, if we could use another verb, others moved along King Street, if you could say moved along, or you could say, then instead of saying moved along, if you could figure that in a less number of characters, then you
No,
could
King
keep
Street,
some.
I think that's,
I'm just saying the verb, if we got a verb for moved along.
that's why I don't like it.
So it said moved along King Street, that's what throws the line. Rioted on King Street, or I guess we're using riot again 2 times on the same side.
How about went down?
I think your first suggestion of putting the some before the others was fine.
Oh, so you're saying to put some on line 2?
Well, that's what you had done.
No, I'd originally said to put it on line 3. Basically
you
saying,
did?
yeah,
Oh.
basically
Well-
saying so that, others joined, but only some people. Hale,
Is the ampersand allowed?
I was wondering about that.
I use it all the time.
Yeah. Well, why don't we just,
Well, why don't you, like Peter said, take the hand out and then do a period and then just say some beat stabbed and
right,
shot.
I thought Philip had the right solution, but you're saying, Robert, too, is basically just putting the period after King Street and then capitalizing the S, then you've got
Peter, that
room.
was your suggestion, wasn't it?
That was my suggestion.
Yeah,
Right,
I think
yeah.
that should work, yeah.
So for several hours, hundreds of white sailors and others moved along King Street. Some beat, stabbed, and shot African Americans. One local newspaper described it as a hunt and chase of Negroes. And again, that was not capitalized there. And pardon?
It was not capitalized in the article.
I'm assuming not. So again, that's why they're not capitalizing it there and they're not using sick, you know,
Because
period needs to be after the quote.
unless that quote was at the end of the sentence. And I think you've actually got Nick's quote from the newspaper.
yes,
I'm not sure
it
if
wasn't
that's-
capitalized, because I think I remember reading from the thing.
I don't think at the time
You
the
don't think
paper
it
was
was?
capitalizing anyway, but we can double check on that. Many defended themselves, including some who took up weapons. The mob overwhelmed city police. An order was restored early May 11, only after, and I'm assuming Marines is capitalized, or, you know,
Yes,
and
that would
military
be.
police intervened. 3 Black residents were killed and dozens were injured.
I have a question.
Sure.
I thought it might have been in Nick's article where he listed, and there were 18 that, because he had a list of the 3 who were killed and then all the people who were injured, I thought, didn't he? It should be.
He's very clear. 3 men,
Right,
not 5, not 6.
right. But then
Died as a result of injury.
and doesn't he list 18 that were,
18 injured parties.
yeah. And this says dozens. And then I'm going to ask you the question. You said you talked with Edward Reedon about why didn't he want to put in the fact that there were also white casualties?
I mean, I raised the point.
What did he say?
He did not think it was, the issue didn't have space. I'm sorry, I don't remember exactly, but I did raise it. I said, do you want to put that in there? And they basically said no, for whatever reason. And again, you know, I can't make him change it. I was just telling him, these are probably questions that are going to come up. When I talk to him, I basically say, these are issues that are probably going to be raised. Do you want to change the language before it comes to us? And I always try to give him, you know, basically trying to say, so we can avoid things like this. And he said he did not want to change the language. So for whatever reason, and I can't put a reason to him. So I probably just don't remember, but I specifically raised that point.
Well, let me say this. I mean, look, the whole reason that we're having this sign is we're trying to correct we're trying to talk about things that have not been talked about. In other words, I mean, I didn't even know, you know, when I wrote A Short History of Charleston, I wasn't even familiar with the 1919 riot because it wasn't in anything ever written about the history of Charleston that I'm aware of, except for the primary sources. I mean, you know, a real historian, I guess you go read all these things. The Navy wrote a big report about it, but it was certainly a minor incident to the minds of most people writing about the history of Charleston prior to the current time. So we're trying to correct omissions of the past. And I mean, we just can't say, I don't disagree, but the sign's only gonna be so big. And yeah. I mean, I think they've done a pretty good job, really.
Impression that only the blacks were.
Well, the blacks were the victims
They were the victims.
and the whites were the aggressors.
I mean, they did say that they defended themselves. They just don't. I mean, they do say that, yes, Dale, and turn on your light. Yep.
Let's talk about the newspaper. I got 2 points. Just looking at McFall's document, it says that 14 were killed, 7 black and 7 white.
Yeah, but he's clearly wrong about that.
You say he's wrong?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, he was, but I think the newspaper, I think everyone says 3.
I mean, Nick, this is what I'm trying to say.
It's 3.
Here's a real live historian.
Right, and that's why I said it. He said 18.
14
and
people
this
were
says
killed.
dozen.
He was adamant 3 people were killed.
I know, and he was also, instead of 18 were injured, and this says dozens.
Well, then we can quibble with the word dozens. Nick, I'm sorry, Dale.
The point is, that's what the newspaper said, that's
Right.
quoted. And the other thing is about newspapers, it says one local newspaper. Why don't we say the Post and or the News and Courier?
I don't know if it was the News and Courier or the Evening Post. I really don't know. I mean, there were two papers at the time.
One instance says that the early edition gave detail, the later edition did not give detail. So I don't know, how can we sort all that out in 250 words?
I think that's why you're saying it's a generic newspaper rather than naming, the News and Courier is just going to take so much stuff. And people are not going to know what the News and Courier is. And you would have to say the News and Courier newspaper. I would think, again, because we're dealing with people who are not from Charleston and it's now even called the Post and Courier. I think most of the people in town would not even know, what the News and Courier was.
I guess I'm beating a dead horse, but I think the word of an academic and trained and respected historian is more credible than the memoir of someone writing, because if I were to write a memoir about my recollections of what happened in my lifetime in Charleston, I can guarantee.
Well, you would make the story better than
I can guarantee you it would not be as accurate as a real historian writing real facts.
I don't disagree with you at
Yeah.
all, but my point is that the News and Courier is quoted as saying 14
No, he didn't.
deaths.
No, that's McFall.
No.
McFall quotes the newspaper.
No, Nick quotes the newspaper. And the book does not have footnotes, so I would, So Robert, Nick says that 18 were injured?
Yeah.
And that's what the newspaper says, correct? Or is that, okay. Sorry, I should have printed it out.
And at least 18 were injured. As opposed to dozens, because, if we're.
Or more
relying
than
on
a
that,
dozen, if we have room for that.
Well, you take dozens out and you put at least 18 and you use 18 as the number and don't spell it out, maybe. I know in the rule, if it's less than 10, you spell it out, but if it's over 10, you can use the numerical.
I would think so, right?
11 and 12 and given text, and 13, and that's my view, 13 is numerical.
Is it 13?
Teams.
Well, I guess. Yeah. Well, I think good. 18 makes enough money.
Nick said more than 18.
Where did it say that? Who is that?
3 men, not 5, not 6. This is pretty specific.
Right.
Died as a result of injuries received during the rioting.
Yeah.
And the names of more than 18 injured parties were identified in the Charleston newspaper.
Okay, so that's basically saying only 18, more than 18 were identified.
No.
That does not give us a specific number.
More than 18 were identified.
So we know more than 18 people were.
Well, that
Injured.
suits me fine.
Uh-huh.
No, not killed, injured. So
Injured.
that's better than dozens, because dozens sounds like it's at least 24 or, whatever. I don't know.
You want to say more than a score?
I would
People
move.
know what a score is.
No.
Right.
I would change that to were killed and over.
We tried to
18
put in over a dozen to see if that would fit instead of dozens.
Yeah.
And over 18,
Yeah, over 18 would be
Or
accurate.
or at least, how about at least 18? That's what I do. Does that work? Yeah.
I think this is the best y'all are gonna do.
Yeah, still.
If that's the case, if someone wants to make a motion. But we can go over. So if there's no more discussion, I'm just going to recap what we've, and you can see Philip's done it with underscoring on some, or not. No, well, I can just see what the changes are. So we have capitalized white on line 2. We have included the word some on line 3. We have on the final line changed dozens, we're over at least 18. I'm asking, so again, Marines capitalized, military police not? Okay. That's how it stands amended. Do we have a second? Okay, any discussion? I mean, I can send it to him right after this or when Philip's got it, but I do think, once we've decided, we've decided.
Nick has some serious problem with.
I mean, but I'm assuming that Nick was sent this and read it. He did get the email. It didn't bounce.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't come to the meeting.
Right.
And this is that thing.
And he didn't edit it either.
So, I mean, whether that means anything or not, but anyway, so,
Paid a penalty
so
sometime.
I'm just going to call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Well, we've done our civic duty. And I guess one thing was left off the agenda, and that was call the meeting to an end. So if that's okay with everybody. Dale, do you have a question?
Well, another matter, if I may, just as information,
Sure.
tomorrow, the C-17s from the Charleston Air Base are going to fly in formation up the Cooper River over the bridges. And it's going to be at 11 o'clock. And there'll be, I think it's 24 of them. Yeah, well, over a dozen. Okay.
Are you baiting us? Are you baiting us? At
Over
least
a dozen.
18.
Yeah. I don't know what the occasion is. This has been published in the paper, but my first notice was from my neighbor who's going to be, is one of the pilots. And they're going to, they all come from Charleston over here, of course. And he said, well, we're going to fly right up the Ashley River. So I don't have to come to Charleston to see it. He's going to fly over our houses. And of course, they're going to land. I don't know if they land 2 at a time or 1 at a time. But anyway, at least over a dozen C-17s from Joint Base Charleston. The largest flyover since 2017. Take off from the base, get in formation, and pass over the bridges at 11 tomorrow. Be something to see.
So you say coming up to Cooper or the Ashley?
Well, they're coming up, they're going to fly up
Yeah.
over and through the harbor up to Cooper River, but when
Okay.
they go home, he said, we're going to fly up the Ashley River to get home.
To get home.
Mhm. And anyway, you don't want to hear about that after the fact, you want to hear about it before.
Although you said this was. Yeah. Well, thank you all. I don't know of anything else coming down the pike, but as soon as they do, I'll let y'all know. And thanks for coming, making quorum and right after the new year and on a rainy day to boot. Thank you all.